Hey everyone, it's Patrick from Oakland Travel, and we're back with another cruise review. On September 4th, 2022, we boarded the Royal Caribbean ship Voyager of the Seas in Copenhagen, Denmark for a 14-night Arctic crossing cruise that would end in Boston, Massachusetts. During the cruise, we stopped in Kristiansand Norway, Akureyri Iceland, Reykjavik Iceland, Qaqortoq Greenland, and we cruised through the Prins Christians Sund area of Greenland. With over 2,800 passengers, the ship was quite full, but never really felt like it, unlike some of our other recent cruises. Almost half of the passengers on this cruise were at least diamond level crown and anchor, and there were hardly any children or teenagers. As with all of our reviews, this one is based solely on our 14-night experience on the Voyager of the Seas for this sailing in September 2022. We'll start with the hits. Number one is the crew. They are the reason we had such a good time on our cruise, and we saw so many examples of the hard work they put in and day out. Our stateroom attendant Deepak Goswami was probably the best we've ever had on any Royal Caribbean cruise going back to 2005. He sets the bar very high. Our waiter and assistant waiter Savio and Vikesh at table 219 for the My Time Dining on Deck 3 were so good at their jobs. They made our dinner every night a pleasurable experience. Samir and Asha in guest services department helped us deal with a lost luggage situation at the beginning of the cruise. These are just a few of the examples of the many amazing crew members we interacted with over the 2-week period. Number two is the food. Windjammer was exactly what I had hoped it would be, and it was so nice to get back to a proper Windjammer that isn't cramped like the one we experienced on the Harmony of the Seas. Also, there were no lines to get into the Windjammer because the hand washing stations were designed properly. We found plenty of options at the various stations, especially around towards the back. When we weren't having dinner in a specialty restaurant, we were in the main dining room every night enjoying a fabulous menu that never duplicated during the 2-week cruise. Everything was cooked to perfection. For our dinner and chops, I had the 9-ounce filet mignon and it was cooked to perfection. We were part of a huge Facebook group who had arranged for a large dinner before the cruise, and the staff were so helpful in setting everything up. For our dinner in Giovanni's, I had the bucatini alla bolognese and the most perfect cannolis for dessert. We shared several appetizers with the group and had an amazing dinner. Number 3 is Cafe Promenade. Unlike the version on the larger ships, such as the Oasis class, I actually prefer the Cafe Promenade on ships such as the Voyager of the Seas. It functions as an anchor point for the Promenade on Deck 5, and it's open from 6 a.m. to 3 a.m. On numerous days during our cruise, our lunch would consist of some variation of pizza, sandwich, or a wrap from Cafe Promenade, along with the obligatory cookies that they're famous for. The coffee and lemonade were always standing by ready to go, along with the specialty coffees and Ben & Jerry's ice cream. The music platform where the musicians would perform for the Promenade is also conveniently located across from the Cafe Promenade, so that's a plus. Number 4 is the Star Lounge. We ended up in here on many nights during the cruise to see the PJ Groove Band perform along with some of the nightly activities from the cruise director staff. The bartenders in the Star Lounge were not the most experienced on the ship, but they still made some pretty good drinks. The lounge was also home to nightly karaoke that was quite popular. Number 5 is the Pig and Whistle Pub. Admittedly, we didn't spend much time in here during our cruise. We did participate in a couple of pub crawls during the cruise where the Pig and Whistle was a stop on the crawl, but we'd only stay in there for about 20 minutes before moving on to the next stop. We did notice the nightly performer in the pub, and he seemed to have a devoted following as we'd walk by each night and see a lot of the same faces. Number 6 is the R Bar. This is the Voyager of the Seas' version of a champagne bar, and if you've ever been on any of the other Royal Caribbean ships in the same class, such as the Adventure of the Seas or the Mariner of the Seas, it'll seem very familiar to you. At times during the cruise, it was a very popular spot, and since it doesn't have a lot of space, we only stopped in a few times for a drink. Number 7 is the Schooner Bar. This is the classic Schooner Bar experience we've been on so many times over the years during our cruising with Royal Caribbean. Of the ships in the Voyager class, the only one we haven't sailed on is Navigator of the Seas, but for the other 4 ships in the class, the Schooner Bar is the same layout and the same nightly fun and entertainment. We stopped in here a few times for a drink before dinner and to enjoy some of the trivia that would precede the nightly entertainment. Number 8 is the Tavern. This bar on the Voyager of the Seas didn't make a lot of sense to me. This isn't meant to be a negative comment per se, just an observation. It's essentially Bolero's on the Voyager, even though it has a different name and a strange layout. The spot in the corner where there should be a band is instead a large semi-private seating area for a big group to sit off to the side away from everyone else. Aside from that, it's Bolero's with a different name and quite a few TVs, which Bolero's on other ships do not need or have. The bartenders were were very good, and this was usually our go-to spot for a drink, and it featured prominently in our Facebook group pub crawls that I mentioned earlier. Number 9 is Studio B. We attended one of the performances of the main ice show on our cruise, and we saw the popular YouTuber Jordan Balth perform in the show. The experience in Studio B is the same as the other 4 ships in the Voyager class, if you've ever sailed on any of those. Number 10 is the Royal Theatre, another popular location on the ship. The theater hosted nightly performances from the headliners. We saw Kenny James perform one night towards the end of the cruise. The theater was also the meeting place for excursions during the cruise, plus the disembarkation process at the end of the cruise. Number 11 is the Junior Suite. This was our first cruise in a Junior Suite, having won a bid in the Royal Up program to go from a balcony to the suite. And I have to say, we might be spoiled from this experience. For the 14 nights of this cruise, I couldn't imagine spending them in the confines of a typical ocean view balcony stateroom. The Junior Suite, with its walk-in closet, larger bathroom, and overall space, were worth the money spent on the upgrade. Number 12 is Deck 11. As this was an Arctic cruise, it was almost always cold and windy on deck, so we didn't spend much time in any of the usual areas on Deck 11, such as the swimming pools or even in the solarium. When the Voyager of the Seas relocates to San Juan, Puerto Rico at the end of 2022, this deck will once again be full of passengers enjoying all of the amenities it has to offer. Number 13 is Deck 12. This one is a hit, but also an observation. As this was the first ship of the Voyager class, I think Royal Caribbean learned a lesson with this layout when it was time to build Explorer of the Seas and Adventure of the Seas. The Vitality Spa that is normally at the front of the ship on Deck 12 for other ships in the class is at the back of the ship on the Voyager. Instead, the front of the ship on Decks 11 and 12 are staterooms, which also means there's no peekaboo bridge on Deck 11. The fitness center and spa on Deck 12 are ample size for the ship, but it was strange to experience them at the back of the ship. The arcade is a little small, but still has a nice selection of games. The areas on Deck 12 for the kids looked similar in size to what we've seen on other ships in this class. Number 14 is Deck 13. The Perfect Storm and Flow Rider weren't used very much on this cruise given the temperatures and windy conditions, but similar to Deck 11, when the ship is in warmer climates later in 2022, Deck 13 will be very busy. The one odd thing I noticed is that because of the layout of the ship, you can only enter through a hallway from the elevators inside the ship at the Centrum elevators. Unlike other ships in the class, you cannot walk around the outside of the ship and get to the sports court area. It's not a big deal, but it's a little strange if you've spent time cruising on the other ships in the same class. Number 15 is Deck 14. On Voyager of the Seas, the space next to the Viking Crown Lounge that is usually the home of the Diamond Lounge is in fact the home of the Suite Lounge. The Viking Crown Lounge itself is pretty familiar if you've been on any of the older Royal Caribbean ships that feature the Viking Crown Lounge, and it's also used for a variety of activities during the day, from Zumba classes to salsa dancing and a Latin fiesta party. At night, the resident DJ would go to work entertaining until the early morning hours. And now we come to the misses. And the first on the list is the Wi-Fi. I'm sure Royal Caribbean gets a lot of complaints about this on the Voyager of the Seas. I can't remember another cruise on any cruise line where the Wi-Fi was this bad, and that's saying something. It was absolutely painful. We met a few passengers during this cruise that actually needed to do a little bit of work for their job, and I'm sure that didn't happen. Because the connection was so poor, my options for posting to and maintaining my YouTube channel were very limited. I know Starlink will eventually be deployed to all of the ships in the Royal Caribbean fleet, so that fact is their one saving grace. Number 2 on the misses list is ordering more canned water for our stateroom. We usually call room service and they just deliver it and put the charge on the account. This time on Voyager of the Seas, they told us we had to go to one of the bars on the ship to order it. That made no sense, and of course the bars weren't told about this. Both times I needed more water, the bartenders had no idea what to do. The first time, the bartender rang up 2 cases of water, 48 cans, as 48 individual cans of water, as if I had walked up to the bar and wanted a can of water 48 times. The second time I needed more water, the bartender leaves and comes back with a case of water and hands it to me at the bar instead of having someone deliver to my stateroom, which I definitely told him is what I wanted. We spoke to someone at guest services just so they would be aware of the disconnect in procedures for something that is normally very simple. And the last item on the misses list is the art gallery. On Deck 4, across from the Tavern, the art gallery just seems so out of place and such a waste of space. Hopefully at the next dry dock, they'll follow the example of the Mariner of the Seas and turn that space into a Starbucks. Maybe they'll even fix the Tavern and turn it back into a Bolero's, who knows. And that does it for our 14-night repositioning cruise for the Voyager of the Seas in September of 2022. If you found this helpful or informative, please give it a thumbs up, as that helps us with the YouTube system. If you like that cruise and travel lifestyle, be sure to subscribe to the channel with the notification bell on so you don't miss anything. And we'll see you in the next vlog episode.